All right, everyone. Hello. And nice to see some of the faces. Well, I can't see you, but I can read some of the names. So welcome. Welcome to our first Lunch and Learn of the year 2025. Thank you for joining and Happy New Year. Hope everyone got some rest. And I can't believe it's end of January, so it just flew by. I don't know about the rest of you, but it's flying by. My name is Maja, Senior HR Consultant at H2R, and your host for today. As you can see, you have been muted, and your cameras are off. If you have questions, please use the chat box or the Q&A box, and you may ask questions at any time. For our speakers, we have Evan coming back. Evan will be talking to us about case law updates and some legislative updates. So I'm looking forward to that. And our lovely Jackie is here with us today. She's talking to us about goal setting. New year, new goals. And at the end, I will be talking about leadership and executive coaching at H2R and our HR Hot Topics event that I'll be talking to you about. So stay tuned and over to you, Evan.
Thank you very much. And hello, everyone. Great to be back for another quarterly legal update. And the plan today, as was mentioned, is to spend some time talking about some of the recent legislative changes. And there's been a number of updates, I'm sure you've heard in the news, in terms of some of the job posting items we had discussed in prior updates. And then, time permitting, I'm going to touch on two very recent cases which have some impact on us as employers. So let's jump in and talk first about the Digital Platform Workers' Rights Act. And this is an interesting piece of legislation that's been in the works for a while now, but it's finally coming into force as of July 1st, 2025. And this piece of legislation is really geared at that gig economy that's out there and is really focused on providing some minimum protections and standards for employees or individuals who are working within those platforms. So let's start off by talking about what is it? What is this piece of legislation? And so really this is similar to the Employment Standards Act in that it's imposing a floor of rights for individuals working within this industry. And it's important to note that similar to the Employment Standards Act, you cannot contract out of these minimum protections. And so there's now going to be these obligations, which we'll talk about in a second, on any business which is working within kind of the digital platform space. And so when we talk about, who does this apply to? So as mentioned, it applies to operators of digital platforms is kind of the descriptor used, and individuals performing digital platform work in Ontario. And the important piece is there, regardless of where those workers are employees. So we often talk about, these rights and employees, and sometimes we think that we can get around some of this by having like subcontractors, which has been a tool used historically within the gig world to avoid some of the protections mandated by the Employment Standards Act. So this is essentially saying no more, you can't do that. And so digital platform is defined as an online platform that allows workers to choose to accept or decline digital platform work. And that digital platform work includes the provision of payment, rideshare, delivery, courier, other services by workers. So a very broad definition. And so if you're in this space, you're in any of this delivery type world where you're allowing individuals through online forums to accept, decline, then should be top of mind for you in making sure that you're in compliance. So Spencer, let's go to the next slide, which flags a bit of the key changes. And I would say I could spend 20 minutes just talking about this, but really the key piece for all of you, if you're in this space, I would do a significant deep dive into this on your own time, and minimum wage, pay and tip information. So really similar to some of the things that you'd be used to under the Employment Standards Act. So if you're in that space, massive change coming to your world. So let's jump ahead to the next legislative kind of developments, I'll say, which is going to be important for all of you likely who are watching this presentation. And so we've been talking about for like the last year, maybe longer, the working for workers various kind of pieces, right? One, two, three, four, five. There's now a six coming down the pipes. And if you may remember the last updates, I think in May, November that I provided, we touched on changes around job postings. And so since those updates, we've now gotten more details and particulars around who these new requirements apply to and really the scope of these new job posting requirements. So let's spend some time kind of going through a deep dive on some of these job posting items. And again, they're both under the Working for Workers 5 Act, and there's some under the Working for Workers 4 Act. And what I want to do before we kind of get into the specifics is start by looking at who is kind of caught by these requirements. So firstly, only applies to employers that employ 25 or more employees on the day the publicly advertised job posting is posted. All right, so 25 or more, and kind of the threshold day being the day you post that posting. So that's an important kind of catchment, right? So be mindful of that. The second piece is, well, what is meant by publicly advertised posting, right? And this has now been defined as an external job posting that you as the employer or someone acting on your behalf, such as, you hire H2R to do your recruiting, apply to them as well. And it's that posting that's gone out to the general public, and it doesn't include the following exceptions. So firstly, it doesn't include a general recruitment campaign that does not advertise a specific position. That's kind of interesting to note. Doesn't apply to kind of like your general help wanted sign, right? So it wouldn't apply to that. Does not apply to a posting for a position that is restricted to existing employees. So obviously like your internal posting items, this would not apply to. It's only this publicly kind of advertised job. So that's important to note. And lastly, it doesn't catch a posting for a position. This is a lot of words drafted by a lawyer, for which work is to be one, performed outside of Ontario, or two, performed outside of Ontario and in Ontario, where the work performed outside of Ontario is not a continuation of this kind of work inside of Ontario. So again, trying to carve out that we are focused on things obviously in Ontario because it's Ontario focused legislation. So there's a number of exceptions there. And again, I know I read them pretty quickly to you, but just flagging for you, I would suggest as you think through the implications of this to your specific business, turn your mind to like number one, does it apply to us? That's kind of question one. And then question two is, does it apply to the specific circumstances of our posting? Meaning maybe you have 25 or more employees, but maybe it's an internal posting, right? Or maybe you're kind of caught by one of these various exceptions which say it's not kind of publicly advertised, and therefore you don't have to necessarily worry about it. Now, you may make the decision, which I think has some common sense, to say, look at to avoid the extra work of us kind of delineating which is caught, which is not. We're just going to make sure our templates are up to date, apply, and we're just going to use that on a go forward basis, which I think again is a common sense approach, but just flagging for you there are some nuance around application. And one example I would provide on that is I've had some recent conversations with clients around, well, hey, we are remote work. We seek workers internationally. We don't care where they're working. In actuality, we may prefer they're not based in Ontario, right? For various business/legal reasons. And so again, how do we position ourselves that we're not kind of caught by these requirements? And so I think, again, if you're in one of those situations, I think there is ways to craft the posting to potentially sidestep. Now, flagging as well, Ontario is not the only province that has requirements around job posting. So just be mindful of maybe not applicable to Ontario, but what about other provinces that have similar rules, such as British Columbia, for example. So that's kind of some background on how does this apply to you. Let's get into some of the specifics now. So firstly, we must include a statement about whether the job posting is for an existing vacancy, right? Nothing too, I would say, significant there. Number two is this obligation following interviews to advise the applicant about the hiring decision. And so we have 45 days, and that 45 days runs from the last interview. So often you're going to do multiple interviews, right? So that 45 days runs from the last interview. And then we have record keeping obligations of 3 years, which are triggered in relation to the records obtained around interviewing some of those applicants or the applicants. So let's jump to the next slide, Spencer, because I think one of the pieces that have gotten a lot of news and lots of concern from employers is around the compensation piece of this, right? So one of the other requirements is the expectation to post compensation ranges. So we got some more details around that as well. And so employers must include the compensation or a compensation range on these publicly advertised job postings. Now, if the expected compensation is going to exceed 200,000, then you don't have to post anything. And that the range, the permitted range, must not exceed $50,000 annually, right? So we can't say the range is like 100 or 200, for example, that won't fly. You could say the range is 1 to 150, right? So that's kind of they're giving us some goalposts in terms of what that range can look like. And these requirements, I should mention, is coming into force Jan 1, 2026. So we have some time, but as we all know, that will be here before we know it. The other piece is the limitation on specifying around or requirements around Canadian experience. Sorry, so you can't kind of say, hey, we want you to have so much experience working in Ontario, working in Canada, for example. So that's no longer permitted. The other piece is around AI, which I find quite interesting, right? Where this is like a new area, I think, for all of us in the world, and in particular in relation to law. But now we have this requirement that the employer specify on the job postings if we're going to be using AI to screen, assess, or select applicants. And so there's some specific commentary around, you know, what constitutes AI and this. So I think if you're going to be using AI at all in your recruitment process, I would say do a little bit of deep dive into that specific issue and whether you're caught. I won't get in too much into it, just be given the limitations on time. But again, important point for you, note if you're using AI, again, do some little more research on whether you're caught, you likely are, and then you have to make sure that is part of that posting. Lastly is record keeping, similarly 3 years for every publicly advertised job posting. So I think the takeaway that I would suggest for all of us with all of these kind of new things coming down the pipes is we have some time, but I think you need to, one, turn your mind to, are we caught by these changes or will we be caught by these changes? Number two is deciding how you're going to best address that. I would suggest potentially, if you're doing your own in recruiting, having a template job posting, which captures these various requirements. And obviously you can play with kind of the commentary you have in there, the ranges, but just make sure that you have that. It's vetted by your internal HR team, external counsel, to make sure it's all caught. You do that once, then you kind of use that on a go forward basis. And I also think making sure that your internal managers, because oftentimes in my experience, some of that hiring process is driven by internal management who may not appreciate all of these fun requirements, even around interviewing and advising applicants, you know, having some policies, some training around, hey, we actually have obligations now to advise people that we interview, which hopefully you're doing before this, but now you have a legal obligation to do that. I think that's also something to be mindful of, and likely put some processes in place to make sure that we're capturing all of our obligations. So a few minutes left. The other important piece that's coming into play is now requirements about what we have to tell employees prior to their first day or as soon as reasonably possible. So again, you see the 6 items on the slide. I won't read those out to you now, but again, important point to note, July 1st of this year, for all your new hires, some basic information that you have to provide them. And again, whether we put this in an offer letter to them, right? I think that's the easiest way to make sure it's covered off, or you have some other process where we know that this information has been provided. And when I say we know, we have a record, right? That we can confirm if questioned that the information has been provided. So lots of legislative changes, and I'll touch briefly with the last few minutes of my time on just 2 cases. And the first case I'll talk briefly about is the default decision, which I know many of you have heard lots about. It's kind of worked its way through the courts. And just wanted to provide a brief update on this because it was at the Court of Appeal recently, and a decision was issued by the Court of Appeal, which essentially found that the decision of the Superior Court was upheld and the termination provision was found unenforceable. So let's maybe fast forward for a few slides, Spencer. Keep going. And let's go to the next one. And let's go to the next slide. So this is the clause at issue in that whole decision, right? And talks about our ability to terminate at our sole discretion without cause, and specifies that we'll have to pay the base salary. And essentially, the court found that this was unenforceable for various reasons. And so, again, we had, as employer counsel, had hoped that maybe the Court of Appeal would throw us a bone, modify the decision a little bit, give us some wiggle room. But no, it's being appealed to the Supreme Court of Canada. Unlikely, I think, to be heard by the Supreme Court of Canada. It's very rare for Ontario employment cases to ever get there. So I think we're stuck with this decision. And the takeaway, of course, is have your employment agreements regularly reviewed, vetted, updated, and anything that's probably a year old, 2 years old that hasn't been modified is likely outdated and needs to be changed just based on the evolution of the law. And again, employment contracts are our best defense to minimize costs and liability at the time of termination. So it's worthwhile, I would suggest, to incur some costs on the upfront, hopefully reduce cost on the back end of a dismissal. Last case that I wanted to touch on, which is an interesting decision recently issued by the Human Rights Tribunal of Ontario, deals with a scenario where an actual union, which is also kind of interesting, who was a respondent for once, had a posting which specified that the successful candidate had to be a qualified woman. And so the applicant, who was male, challenged this posting as being discriminatory. And Spencer, we can go to the next slide. And ultimately, what the kind of employer union argued was that they had a special program in place, which is permitted under the Human Rights Code, to essentially promote the hiring of specific identified groups or persons to try to create equal opportunity. So in this case, they identified that the females were underrepresented in that kind of specific position. And ultimately, the Human Rights Tribunal dismissed the case. And Spencer, we can go to the next slide. Dismissed the case and found that this was permitted, that the special kind of program that the union had developed was an equity plan, was tasked and focused on ensuring that there was kind of equal representation among that specific position, which was a grievance officer. So there's obviously good reason to have equal representation and good reason for that plan by the union. So again, just a reminder that these are things we can do, right, in our workplace if we're trying to kind of going back to that job posting focus. If we're trying to make sure that we have equal representation, not just in gender, but also in other enumerated grounds, that there are ways that we can achieve that. Again, you need to have a proper documented plan. You need to have records of all the backup, but there is a defensible position to achieve that objective if that's something you want to pursue within your workplace. Happy to take questions now. Obviously, happy to pass it to Jackie as well, and happy to take any questions offline or at the end of the talk.
Then, thank you for that. I think we have a few questions that have come in into the Q&A box. Would you like me to read them for you?
Sure. It's just loading for me now. So yeah, fire
Okay.
away.
Can we please get a copy of the 6 items required as of July 1st, 2025?
Of course, yep. And that'll be, I think, in the slides. And I think H2R will
Yep,
circulate those slides.
for sure. And there's going to be a recording that's it's also available after. So, is telling the interviewed applicant that we do not wish to move forward with their application at this time enough within the 45 days?
Yes. And so all that basically says if we interview someone, we just have to tell them the status of that process, right? Because maybe you haven't made a decision, right? So maybe within the 4 days, you just tell the person, look, it's sorry, either we're not proceeding with your application, or hey, we're still assessing, we'll get back to you, or it's simply you unfortunately weren't selected. So we just have to advise them the status or advise them of the hiring decision. So I have it loaded now. So maybe
Okay.
I'll just, for time's sake, answer some of them. Yeah, classic question. Can you please provide an example of what is meant by work that occurs both within and outside of Ontario, but does not continue outside of Ontario? Yeah, this is one of those great legal things that is, challenging to decipher, right? But generally, if we're talking about work that's not tied to Ontario, that's really kind of the focus of that analysis. So, for example, if you hired a remote worker who was servicing solely Ontario customers, well, that's going to have an issue. That's going to be caught. So really, we want to have some business way to differentiate the work of that kind of remote worker outside of Ontario. And in my experience, if you only have operations in Ontario, I wouldn't say it's impossible, but you can guess the kind of the challenge in trying to differentiate, well, is that work that's tied or continued in Ontario or not? So that can be a bit of a dicey issue and one of those great gray legal things which keep me employed. And let me just do maybe one more, Maja, before I pass it off to Jackie, just for time.
Yeah.
And so one of the questions was, what is to be retained from a job posting? And so those requirements around retention, firstly, you have to retain the actual posting, right? So your publicly advertised postings, which are captured, you're gonna have to retain those. And so that's really gonna be the kind of the crux of, what you're gonna have to focus on in retaining around the public advertised postings. So maybe for time now, I'll pass it off. I'm happy to answer other questions via email or if we have any time at the end.
Sounds good. Thank you. Thank you, Evan. That was very informative. I'm glad we also have about a year to grasp on all the changes, for most of them at least. So, all right. Over to you, Jackie.
Happy New Year, everybody. Good to see you again. I'm going to make a request that if you want to share something in the chat, do it in the chat versus Q&A for me, because the Q&A just will not load, but I can see the chat, no problem. So that's my request, if you don't mind. That would be amazing. All right, new year, new goals. I don't know about any of you. I'd love to hear. I kind of rebel against New Year resolutions. Like I think I'm just a little bit of a rebel. I just don't like being told or have expectations. However, what you're going to hear in this presentation is we talk about the science of setting goals and how important it is. So I'm giggling at this rebellious side of me. I want to just talk about what do we mean by goals. You're going to note my language today is around personal goal setting, but we can dance between the business too. I mean, it's to me, it's kind of understood or implied, but if you need me to be specific about that, please call it out for me. Let's talk about the science behind it and of course, a couple of strategies. We only have 15, 20 minutes, so this is a little boot camp. We're going to as usual, throw a bunch of stuff at you. And I love, Spencer, that you keep up with me. You're like a millisecond ahead of me. You're amazing. So let me just kickstart by sharing Gail Matthews' research paper that she had done on goal setting. And the bottom line is that they found that people who specifically write down their goals, are 42% more likely to achieve them compared to those who do not. So I'd love to know who writes them down. You could just throw a yes in the chat if you do. Who writes your goals down? Throw a yes in the chat if you're one of those people. So the other thing that's important to know from her study is just sharing the written goals, right? When we actually share this with our friends or family or our colleagues, it just highlights the power of accountability. I don't know about you, but when I'm ready to be held accountable is when I'll say, okay, I'm doing dry January and February. And I say it out loud to make sure that the people around me are holding me accountable. Thank you for answering, Linda and Maya. I'm just throwing up this story because it's something most of us remember, to see if it rings a bell for you. So a compelling story about the goal achievement of Jim Carrey, right? He was the comedian from Canada. And in the early 1990s, Carrey was struggling. He wrote himself a check, I don't know if you heard the story, for $10 million for acting services rendered, and then dated it. So this was 1990. He dated it for Thanksgiving of 1995. He kept the check in his wallet as a constant reminder of his goal. So years later in 94, he starred in Dumb and Dumber. The movie grossed over 400 million worldwide. And just before the Thanksgiving he had written on the check, he received a contract for $10 million to star in a film. So for me, this isn't a story of the law of attraction. It's the idea, and in Jim Carrey's own words, it's about being very intentional about what he wanted to achieve, such that it was driving his behavior, his actions, to make sure he could achieve it. It wasn't about sitting there and just saying, I'd really like to manifest this. No, this is important to me. And he had a daily reminder in his wallet to make sure that he was not only visualizing the success, but taking action to make sure that it was achieved. If any of you have a specific story of someone that we might all be familiar with, or even yourself, stick it in the chat. I'd love to hear from you. So let's make sure that we're aligned around the definition. So goals are typically, right, specific and measurable. They're the end achievements or objectives that we want to reach, right, to achieve within a certain time frame. The short-term ones are relatively short, so typically ranging from, a few days a year. There's stepping stones to something a bit bigger sometimes. So it could be, I will only have, I was thinking about weight is where my brain went. It's like, so I will only have one sweet treat a week. So that could be the goal, but it's to achieve something greater, right? The longer term ones are the broader objectives, right? Something we want to accomplish. So it might be, I'm going to stick with the healthy thing. It might be reduce my A1C numbers and my weight by this much. The same thing from the workplace perspective. So when I think about facilitating strategic planning for teams or whole organizations, what do? We start with the biggest, like the big, hairy, audacious goals. What are the top 3 or 4 things that you want to achieve in, say, 3 years, whatever time frame we choose? And then we chunk it down to goals that are achievable and short term to make sure that we're getting there. It's like making sure we're creating the place for the habits to occur to achieve the longer term goals. Hopefully that makes sense too. All right, next slide, Spencer, please. So what are the benefits then of goal setting? What's important about doing this? Hang on one second, bear with me. So there's a lot of benefits. And so as much as I giggle at the rebellious part of me that doesn't want to do what everybody else does by having a resolution, like at the same time, we know that when we have a couple of really clear goals that are important to us, whether it's for ourselves personally or in our lives professionally or with our teams, right? It gives us like kind of clear direction, which increases the sense of purpose, right? It enhances the meaning making that we give. So it allows us, thank you, Margaret, allows us to stay focused on what's important. And I'll share this with you. I'm working with one client group right now. They're a Fortune 500 company, and they're struggling financially for the first time in 17 years. And their people are disengaging quickly because they're losing their sense of purpose. And so one of the things I've been sharing with the leadership team is, please, like, I know that these are tough times, but there still has to be meaning. There has to be purpose. So what goals do we have to get through this really crappy time? And so when you align around things like that, it helps you to survive even the most challenging things. I'm stating the obvious, but I just want to make sure we have some shared language around it. Enhance self efficacy. So when we have a clear goal that's like intrinsically and extrinsically motivating to us, there's confidence. Like, it just kind of gives us that extra kick in our step, leading to that positive feedback loop to say, okay, look, I've achieved step 1 and 2, let me keep going. Benefits, of course, are motivation. So intrinsically, it can ignite that desire. It's a personal value that you have. It's aligned to the things that are important to you. And extrinsically, of course, there's the cool, when we call the feedback loop, when we achieve our goals, right? There's something about that boost of dopamine that gets released into the body, those happy hormones that make us excited. And so I don't know about any of you, so you can put in the chat, yes, if it's you. Are you one of those that the to-do list is in your head, but suddenly you realize you just banged out 3 things, so you write it down and you hit the check mark anyway? Just, who does that? Hands up, or in the chat, just put yes, because you know as much as I giggle about it, it genuinely feels good. Right. And so there's nothing better. Linda, I got you, girl. Like, nothing better than going, look at me. I did 3 today and I got 3 more. It literally releases those happy hormones into our body to keep us focused. Right. And then, of course, the clarity of our priorities is really clear. So we can put boundaries around the things we need to say no to, or yes, I can do it and it'll have to be later. Who uses the yes and, right? And help us to reduce the distraction. So one of my challenges is I'm other oriented by nature. I'm always looking to other about how I can help. And I'm learning still at my age to sometimes be self-focused. Like, okay, Jackie, what are you wanting? The thing about the goals is it helps me to create that pathway for self when I'm looking at my own personal goals. So I can remove some of the distractions that I often let in when I'm not being as focused. All right, next slide. So just me and my geeky science side of things is just wanted to share a couple of theories in case they're useful to you. So let's talk about Edwin Locke and Gary Latham. They did a great big project research study that established that specific and challenging goals that are going to kind of push us lead to higher performance. So when we get vague goals that aren't attached to something important to us, they're a little bit too easy. They don't inspire us. The meta-analysis highlighted that the goal specificity and understanding the difficulty was really important, just as much as the feedback to get that enhanced motivation. The American Psychological Society or Association, research published indicated goal setting can improve performance in various domains. So whether it's academic or it's in our athletic world, it's in our work world, the studies show that individuals who set the structured goals not only perform better, but also have that increased motivation and satisfaction. Stating the obvious, but making sure that we're on the same page. And the do goals, like a study that individuals who set do, like action-oriented goals that are very, not about outcome focused, but what are the habits or actions I'm going to take? We know those habits or actions are going to lead to this result. So that's often, as when I put my coach hat on, I'll say, what's the end result you're wanting to achieve? Okay, then what habits or actions do you believe will get you there faster or have gotten you there before? So the study suggests when you do that, you also can have greater levels of success. All right, next slide. I am talking fast, I'm noticing, as usual. There's a couple of points here. So the neuropsychology of goals, like how setting goals affects our brain function, our behavior. So brain activation, I've already alluded to a couple of times. We want to make sure that when we're setting the goal, the prefrontal cortex is the decision-making part of our brain. So it allows us to manage those emotional reactions, right? In case we're triggered by someone who says you have to do this, maybe your mom has called you, or your teenager has called you, or your boss has called you. It's like, I am very clear in my head what those strategic goals are that we set. This isn't aligning. Let's talk about it. So it allows the prefrontal cortex to actually do some clearer, focused decision making. Hopefully that makes sense. You don't get caught up in the emotional hijack that we can have. The dopamine release is what I was referring to earlier. So when we have those goals set and then we've achieved them, it triggers that release of dopamine. So it's that pleasure and reward hormone that sits in our body. It genuinely feels good. So we often refer to that as the reward feedback loop. You want to make sure you're giving yourself feedback. So that's the other thing I often say to leaders and team managers is make sure you have clear milestones and goals that are set. And then every week, every month, every quarter, however you choose to do that, you're taking a step to say, have we achieved? Because we're so busy working towards the next thing and the next thing, we forget to stop and take a breath and go, hey man, look, here's what I learned where I may not have met the goal. Here's what I've learned. Here's what I have done. And I'm really proud of that. When we do that, it's that release of the dopamine, which allows us to feel really good and keeps that motivation going. All right, number 3, the cognitive clarity. So when the goals enhance our cognitive function by being really clear, it helps us to set priorities. We have clearer objectives, so we're going to filter out the distractions much quicker. So as I mentioned, when the prefrontal cortex is clear on the priorities, it allows the emotional center of the brain to kind of declutter and not overwhelm us in our decision making. All right, so it allows us to focus, to declutter, and to feel those rewards. All right, and the last one, I believe there might be 5, I can't remember in this moment. The emotional regulation I keep alluding to. So goal setting plays a really key role here by providing us a sense of purpose. What's the direction that we're going? We've thought it through. So what else it can do for us is to manage anxiety and stress. When we're living in ambiguity and we're just kind of winging it in life or in business, we feel less control. And so when we have a sense of purpose, there's more clarity in our decision making. There's less anxiety and stress that happens. So we're going to counterbalance those stress hormones because we have direction, which allows for better emotional regulation. I'm just checking on you, Maya. You okay? Because I saw your face pop up. You're good? Awesome.
You're
All right,
good.
lastly, thank you. Lastly, on the neuropsychology, so behavior activation. So goals encourage proactive behavior, right? So I kind of alluded it, like in Jim Carrey's example, if this is the goal, then how do I need to behave? What steps do I take? Right? The brain's reward system gets actively engaged when we've taken the steps toward the goals, which keeps reinforcing, why are we doing this anyway? It builds that resiliency in our coping strategy, especially if we've chosen some challenging goals, if they're big, hairy, audacious goals, right? All right, next one. So the question then becomes, how do we, what are the many things that we can do? And so I'll use this with teams or individuals. I'll literally do a visualization. I just said to a team yesterday, let's dream this together. And that was my way of taking the whole team through a visualization. Or I'll do it one-on-one with my executive coaching clients. So it's that mental practice of imagining the goals or the desired outcomes that you want. What is it? I always, I say, what does it look like? What does it feel like? What does it sound like? I want them to pull out as much out of their heads and their hearts about what they're dreaming of. There's a practice that I use with the clients at the Accelerator Center. I call it vivid visioning. And so in a 1-hour meeting, I have them do a couple of quiet meditative dreams to allow me to capture all of those poignant visions that they have. They're often feeling words, they're outcome based. So you can make space for that. It helps you to set ones that are more meaningful to you. All right, next step on visualization, next slide. So how does it work? Number 1, it's brain stimulation. So when we visualize the outcome or the success that you're hoping to achieve, your brain starts to activate those neural pathways because you're experiencing them. You start to know, what does that feel like? This increases your confidence. It sort of declutters the brain from the stress because it's like, I think I know where I'm going. I even know what it feels like and what it's going to sound like. Enhanced motivation. So the visualizing, the end result creates that sort of mental representation, right? It can boost the commitment. That's why people do vision boards, right? And the vision board thing for me didn't work, but when I did visualizations, just storytelling, that worked for me. I have other clients where the visuals are really important. So I have one leader who last week took his entire team through a vision board exercise virtually. And he said to me, Jackie, the first 30 minutes were bumpy. Like we didn't know what we were doing. We've never done it before. He said, But what was so awesome is you could feel their energy going up, and they got more motivated and excited for each other. So they did one for themselves individually, and then they did a vision board for their team, which I thought was really super cool. And then, of course, how does it work? It's a coping mechanism. So it really just helps you think through what are possible challenges or setbacks you could be experiencing, and then allows you to say, given these might occur, given my assumptions or beliefs about the marketplace or my family or whatever it is that you think could be challenges, you start to um, understand that they're there. You have a sense of control, and your brain starts to work around, okay, given these are possible bumps or pathways in the way of my goal, what do I need to do? So it's a coping mechanism. All right, next slide. So find a quiet place, right, without distraction. Create really clear imagery. As I said, you could use a tool like vivid visioning just to help you really pull out all of your senses. What do you see? What do you hear? What do you feel? What will be different in your life because, or what will be different at work because, and then practice it regularly. So incorporate visualizing into your routine. For me, it is something that I do when I'm waking in the morning. When I'm just kind of just, a herkel dirkling, the Scottish term of lounging in bed and not ready to get up. Hope that's new to you. I love to herkel dirkle. Just sit there in the morning, snuggled under my blankets. But my practice is, it's a gratitude practice for me, and then a visualization about, given what's important to me this year, what do I want to make sure I do today? And how do I want to be today to allow me to get there? So for me, it sets the tone. All right. Next one. So key ways, another way to make sure that we're being intentional and building this practice, into our lives, is to make sure we're setting up accountability. It plays a crucial role in goal setting by providing that support and that motivation, and also that sense of responsibility. So finding accountability partners or groups that can help you and or your team or your organization, clarify the goals, track the progress, and then stay committed. So what are the ways that accountability contributes to it? Is number one, commitment. Sharing the goal with others just creates that sense of obligation. I shared that with you. I said, when I finally say it out loud, I'm grinning because I always feel that sort of vulnerability. Like, oh my God, I've said it out loud. But it's showing that I'm not just agreeing to this goal, I'm literally committing to it now. The second one is motivation, right? So accountability partners often encourage each other. We celebrate successes with each other, provide support when the challenges come up or get in the way. And it can boost morale and just kind of keep you going, get resilient and persistent and gritty as you're stepping forward to achieve those goals. Third part is the feedback. So nothing better than accountability partners that give you some feedback. You refine your goal. Maybe it wasn't clear enough. Maybe it wasn't motivating enough according to the values that you hold. So there's something special about finding those commitment or accountability partners that will also give you some feedback. Regular check-ins, so making sure that you're putting some time in your calendar with your accountability partner to help you stay focused. We have paid coaches out there for a reason. When my clients get on the call, they're like, oh, you're going to check on me and the goals that I've set. And I was like, okay, so you didn't achieve something this week. Let's talk about that, right? So there's something awesome about having regular check-ins. It's a way of committing to yourself that these goals are important. And of course, the shared learning. So that's another outcome, but being a part of a group of individuals that learn from each other's experiences as we're learning and gaining insights and strategies that can aid in our own goal achievement. So for me, incorporating accountability into the goal setting process is important. That helps, whether it's for you individually or it's for an organization or a team, you're going to increase your likelihood of success. All right. So, we're talking about incorporating accountability, but what I also want you to consider is incorporating goal adjustment. How do we adjust? How do we make sure that there's flexibility? So always adapting to change. Life is constantly changing, right? Remember we used to do strategic planning for 20 years? Are any of you old enough to remember strat planning was, what are we going to do? It's like, no, then it became 10. Now it's kind of 1 to 2 years because the world is changing so fast around us. So we want to make sure that we're also putting practices in our personal life and in our business world that allows us to adjust those goals. Because if we don't, we know what happens. They don't motivate. You look at it and go, oh yeah, I remember that, right? You want to make sure you're just building in a check-in time with self check-in. Maybe you did New Year's resolutions, right? All right, so it's now Feb 1st, March 1st, whatever you choose to do, build a ritual that allows you to adapt, to stay relevant, to make sure they're achievable and motivating enough. Make sure they're realistic. So just regularly assessing to make sure, was I being realistic, or did I have too many wines with my girlfriend on January 1st to set these goals? I got to make sure they're meaningful and they're realistic to allow me to achieve. Right? Enhanced learning. So when we're reflecting on what's working and what isn't, it gives you insight. So it's like just slightly adjust how you're going to measure that success, or maybe you've forgotten a habit or ritual that would help you achieve that success. Maybe you avoided something in the setting of it. Maybe it was related to people that you've got to navigate with and through. And then lastly, making sure you're creating space for adjusting is to keep that sustained motivation. So if you have maybe achieving smaller goals that have been adjusted, gives you that dopamine hit that we talked about earlier, to making sure you're feeling that sense of, just feel good hormone, that sense of accomplishment to help you maintain your motivation and the grittiness to keep driving forward. All right, let's start to wrap this up. So setting goals for 2025, let's go forward. So aligning, I kind of implied this a couple of times or said it directly. When we make sure that the goals are aligned with your personal values, in the context of the work world, make sure the goals are aligned with the corporate values, right? So we might have team values, we might have organizational values. I always say, given the values and the outcomes you're looking for, align those. It will increase motivation, especially on the personal level. Make sure those goals are aligned with the things that inspire you. So there's exercises to do that. If anyone wants a couple of tips, send me a little email, Jackie@JackieLauer.com, and I'll go, here's 6 steps to aligning your goals with your values. You want that greater sense of satisfaction. So achieving the goal that reflects your values gives you that sense of drive and purpose. I'll often say to clients who are not achieving a goal, or I have a client, was literally, it was Monday. In Chris's case, it was just like, Chris, all I hear is you shaming yourself and bullying yourself, but I want you to take a step back and say, given the values you have, what have you achieved and what have you left to get done? We want to make sure there's consistency in our decision making, so consistency will come when we are aligning to our values. These are the things that are important to me, right? Then I know I can achieve this. And of course, when you're aligning to something that motivates you, your values, that's where our behavior and our decision comes from anyway. Let's be conscious about it. So that will give you a strong foundation to stay resilient because you truly, genuinely care about it. All right, might be on the last slide or two here, Maja. So bottom line, don't forget to track your process, right? Make sure you're checking in with yourself regularly to say, am I achieving those goals, right? Make sure that you're using that time to engage the brain's reward system. You're going to make sure you're managing um, uh, managing your stress hormones by increasing the happy hormones. At the same time, if anyone uses any tools to track your progress towards goals, whether it's personally or professionally, it's a digital tool or an online tool, drop it in the chat, because I'm sure people would love to know what it is that you are doing. I'm noticing this is becoming more and more important to teams and organizations. It's like, what is an online tool that allows us to see the goals together as a whole org and our success in achieving those? I think it's a pretty important tool to bring into our workplace. All right, last slide, I believe. So track your progress, right? Make sure you have like a goal journal. You can use some digital tools and some apps. Breaking in your main goal into smaller pieces is pretty important if you need that. Some people need very clear action steps that they can take each day. And then regularly just checking in and adjusting to help you get there. All right. So final summary, what resonated with you? If there's anything that stuck out the most for you today, please share. And thanks, Ashley. Bamboo HR is a great goal settings option. So let us know what resonated with you, and thank you for having me. Happy New Year, everybody.
Thanks, Jackie. When you talked about visualizing your goals, is it almost similar to manifesting goals as well? Like I do a lot of manifestation, so wondering if it's similar.
It's a language thing, right? So people will misunderstand when we say manifest your dreams. they attribute it. Often people will attribute it to things like The Secret. And so the criticism became, what actions are we taking? I don't care what language we use. Manifesting will often include visualizations, right? Whether it's visualizing the end result or visualizing how you need to be each day, it's a part of that process.
Okay, good to know. All right.
Mm.
Well, thanks, Jackie. Hopefully everyone found that useful as we start thinking about our own goals and objectives in our workplace. So amazing. Thank you. All right. So I would like to switch gears just a little bit and talk about leadership and executive coaching. Next slide. While we offered these services under the H2R umbrella, we have revamped our coaching packages and added a group coaching service, or what we call it, leader peer-to-peer group coaching. It is a monthly online meetup, coach facilitated workshop for leaders and emerging leaders from different employers. We still have spots available, but the cutoff is at 10 liters maximum. It is very cost effective as well. It's priced at $2,500 per year, and you receive one-on-one coaching session quarterly and access to the H2R Learning Academy course catalog, which also includes all of our leadership content as well. It's really perfect for those who are wanting to network, explore daily challenges, and just building your leadership toolbox. So if you're interested, please email me or our training team, and I'd be happy to provide you more details on that. We've also structured, go back. Just wanted to talk about our coaching packages. So we structure them. We have a 3-month, 6-month, and a 12-month coaching package, as you can see. They all include initial assessments, which allow the coach to understand really the client's needs, the strengths, and areas of development, providing that benchmark for greater structure in the coaching meetings. So if you would like to learn more or chat to us about what we can offer, please reach out to Brad. His contact information is there on the screen. And if for some reason our standard packages don't align with your vision or your goals, we'll collaborate with you to create a personalized coaching plan that is suited for your leadership objectives. So keep that in mind. All right. So now we have an upcoming event. Just wanted to talk to you that we will be bringing back our HR Hot Topics. So it's been a while. We're hosting one on April 30th. It is from 8 in the morning to noon, and a full breakfast is served. There's going to be lots of great speakers, and it's at one of my favorite places, the Whistle Bear Golf Club. It is a free event. Registration opens on February 18th. So if you would like to join us, you can email me directly and I will send you the registration link on February 18th. I can register for you, but I can certainly send you that link. And yeah, we're hoping to see everyone there. It's open to HR professionals, small business owners, anyone really who's interested in learning more. And it's hosted by us, obviously H2R, Bernard and Associates, and Dowlings. So looking forward to that. Awesome. I think we have just 5 minutes. I don't know if there's any questions, but I know there was a question that came up for Evan. I know we were running out of time, but Evan, if you're there, can you answer? Jennifer Walker had a question. Is a pre-screen considered an interview?
Yeah, great question. So I would say unclear based on the legislation, but my thought to you, Jennifer, would be if it's kind of the classic pre-screen, right? We actually, we're just assessing applicants, making sure they have the specified whatever eligibility requirements prior to doing an interview, then I would say no, that's not part of the interview process. Naturally, if that pre-screening is more robust and we're engaging in some type of discussion with the individual beyond simply like, do you have X, Y, and Z, then you kind of get in that gray area and it may be captured as an interview.
Okay. And just one more, I don't know if you answered this one or not, from Sarah. Does the job posting requirements apply to jobs posted on individuals' personal LinkedIn?
individual's personal LinkedIn, I would say, yeah. Like, again, if it's simply like me saying, hey, I want to hire a new lawyer, probably not. But if you're working for an organization in HR, obviously in recruitment, and you're like posting an actual job posting, then I would say yes. Because the restrictions are less focused for obvious reasons on like where it's posted, because there's so many of those platforms that you can now use, and more so on the other items I discussed. So if it's, you are advertising for your own organization, whether as an ownership role or an HR role, then I would say better safe than sorry, and make sure you have those various items covered off.
Okay. And just last one, is there a minimum number of employees in the organization? Oh, hang on, I just lost it. That the new digital rules apply to?
No, so great question. So in terms of that digital kind of minimum standards legislation that's put in place, the way it's drafted, it talks about any employees. So there's not kind of like a minimum number that in broad strokes it would apply to.
Okay. Amazing. Excellent. So if there are other questions, feel free to reach out to us. We will be sending out the recording. And that wraps up our January Lunch and Learn, and we will see you next month. Thanks, everyone. Have a good one.